Good morning. Thank you for sticking around through the last day. I'm very excited to introduce Alison and Gammie today. I am the chair of the Keynote and Plenary Subcommittee, and this is one of the great things that we get to do as part of the Meetings Committee is introduce the plenary and keynote speakers. Alison Gammie is the director of NIGMS, Division of Training, Workforce, and Diversity. This is the focal point of the NIGMS programs aimed at developing a strong and diverse biomedical research workforce. Dr. Gammie received her BA from Reed College in biology and her Ph.D. from Oregon Health and Sciences University. She was initially a Jane Caufield's Child postdoctoral fellow and became a senior lecturer at Princeton University. While she was at Princeton, in addition to teaching, mentoring, and running a research lab, she served as an academic advisor, an associate member at the Cancer Institute of New Jersey, the director of diversity programs and graduate recruiting. Her honors include the Princeton President's Award for Distinguished Teaching, the Graduate Mentoring Award, and the American Society for Microbiology Hinton Award for advancing the research careers of underrepresented minorities. Today, she will talk to us about what the NIGMS is doing to catalyze change in biomedical research training. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Alison Gammie.
Good morning, everyone. Here, this is a little strange. Can you hear me? Okay, great. Thanks for turning out and sticking it out to the end. I really appreciate it. And I'm going to take some time today to try to tell you some of the things that are happening at NIH in the postdoctoral space in particular, and training in general. So just to set the stage, some of the major issues that are coming to the attention of the NIH in training include the fact that, as you're well aware, biomedical research is in a rapidly evolving space. So if you just take an example, if you did a search term for actin back in 1980, it was really actually possible to read every paper in the scientific literature about actin. If you compare that to 2017, where there are over 100,000 articles, you now know that you cannot advise a graduate student working in this field to know the literature. It's absolutely impossible. And likewise, if you look at nucleotide sequences or protein structures, it's just an information explosion. And so people who were maybe doing their graduate training in the 80s might have a different sense of what it is to do graduate education in 2017. So we just have to make sure that training is keeping pace with the rapid change in science. Another significant issue that I'm sure you're all aware of because it's hit the popular press and it's something we as scientists have to face, and that is this issue of reproducibility. And it's hit the whole range, but I think one of the things that's clear is that training is a perfect space to have conversations around rigor and transparency to enhance reproducibility in science. Another issue, which I'm sure you're quite aware of, is the current research incentive structure is such that, on occasion, there's a conflict between what's best for the trainee and what's best for, well, quote unquote, best for research productivity. And so often, trainees are they're being treated much more like workforce. And for that reason, if you're treated as workforce, I think then issues around rights and benefits and other issues really come to the forefront. And I think that I'm sure this group is well aware of that. Another important issue is the current career landscape. And again, you know this, that the sort of traditional, what people used to think of as the traditional path for postdoctoral fellows was into academic research. And you, I'm sure, are well aware that this is only a fraction of the careers that trainees are transitioning into in the biomedical research workforce. So it's really important that graduate students and postdocs are given the skills that they need to transition into this variety of biomedical research careers. Another important issue is one of representation in the scientific workforce. So if you look at students who are interested in pursuing STEM or science, technology, engineering, or mathematical careers, women are shown here in the orange bars with underrepresented women in the light orange bars. Men are shown in green with underrepresented men in light green. You can see that the representation in community college degree holders and bachelor's degree holders is significant and is reflective of what is seen in our society. But as you start moving into higher degrees in the STEM fields, you can see a significant diminishing of certain underrepresented minority groups and women. And by the time you hit the faculty positions, you can see an ever-decreasing number of women and underrepresented minorities in the biomedical fields as faculty members. What this translates to in the NIH world, if you look at the 2010 census, you can see some of the underrepresented groups that I've been talking about are in the more colorful bars at the top. If you look at NIH trainees, you can see a severe underrepresentation of certain minority groups. And then if you look at NIH principal investigators, you almost can't make out the certain groups at the top of this bar. So you can see that there is a significant loss of talent as people transition through the biomedical career pathway. Okay, so what is NIH doing to try to address some of these really important issues in training and in the biomedical research workforce? First is to try to get folks on the ground to think about such things. And so one of the things that NIGMS has done is to really stimulate creativity out in the field, so to speak, and have educator-initiated initiatives. One is a training module to enhance data reproducibility. This is in NIH speaks something called an R25 mechanism. We have several that have been awarded in the past, and these modules are found on our webpage, and you're welcome to use the modules and incorporate them into your training programs. We have reissued this R25, so for those of you who are interested in maybe developing one of these educational modules, please, we encourage you to apply. Another area where NIGMS has tried to stimulate innovations is through administrative supplements to our pre-doctoral T32 grants. And they've been in 4 areas. 3 in the past, and we have a new one coming up. Rigor and reproducibility, or rigor and transparency to enhance reproducibility. One in the area of career development. Another one in skills development, including technical skills, operational skills, and professional skills. And a new one that will be coming out, or we hope to release, in safety in the research environment. With the budget bump that NIH got this year, NIGMS intends to reissue these again. So if you know folks who have a T32 predoctoral NIGMS program, you can encourage them to apply for one of these. In particular, I think that the career development has a broader effect on a training environment, and that will include postdocs as well. All right, so what are we doing to try to catalyze some change in the training environments, in particular at the research-intensive institutions? I'm sure it's not a surprise to you that many folks are calling for change in graduate education. They've been doing this for years. I'm just showing a few articles here and some major meetings that have been directed towards this. We've been also thinking about this at NIGMS. NIGMS, as you may know, is a major is sort of the training institute at NIH, and this is just an illustration of that fact. So these histograms, these bars show predoctoral support, so the support across all of NIH for graduate students, basically. And you can see GM, that's NIGMS, is far and away a leader, and pretty much at all of the major research institutions across the country. So changes that NIGMS makes in their programs are likely to have a pretty broad effect in the country. So what we're trying to do at NIGMS is to catalyze change, as I mentioned, to keep pace with the rapid evolution of biomedical research. So along these lines, we've issued a new funding announcement for our T32 programs, where incoming programs are going to have to address several areas. The first is to really shift the emphasis back to the trainee. So the goal is to produce a diverse pool of skilled researchers who have technical, operational, and professional skills that they need to transition into the biomedical research workforce. And what we mean by technical, operational, professional, technical can include methods and technology, quantitative approaches. Operational is acquiring information, experimental design, data interpretation. Professional are what you might imagine in the area of management, leadership, communication, and teamwork. We also want the programs to focus on rigor and transparency, the responsible and safe conduct of research, as well as diversity and inclusion. And we want to see that these elements are threaded throughout the training program and not just little courses that are taken here or there or little gestures towards this. This needs to be integral to the training programs. We also have taken steps in the funding announcement to try to address this issue of the conflict in the research incentive structure and to ensure that trainees are treated as trainees and not as workforce. We want to see that there's mentor training and that there's oversight of the mentor-mentee relationship, and this is throughout the training experience for the appointed students. We also want to make sure that the training programs have set obtainable and measurable training goals, and this is kind of analogous to specific aims in a research grant where there are real goals that the program has for the trainees and that they expect for them to have certain skills and be ready to transition to the next stage in the biomedical pathway. And we're going to require the collection and dissemination of data on the successes and failures of these interventions. And we also want to see that career outcomes are posted on public sites. And the reason for this is just full transparency for trainees to see where are they heading in the future, and also making well-informed decisions about what programs to join. I'm not going to go through the whole funding announcement. It's out now, and you're welcome to read it. I just wanted to take a few highlights that would potentially be relevant to the group today. And as I mentioned, there's a new element that has to do with career preparation. We'd like to see posted outcomes. We want the trainees to be introduced to the range of careers in the biomedical research workforce and provide opportunities to develop skills for experiential learning. This could include internships, shadowing, or informational interviews. And the hope is, again, that this will have a broad impact on this training environment, and it will have a positive effect for postdocs as well. So this feeds in nicely to another larger NIH initiative through the Common Fund. So that means that all of the NIH institutes are involved in this. And that's the BEST program. And I hope that all of you have heard about this, but this is sites across the country that have been given money from NIH to develop areas in this space of career development with the view that there's a range of careers that support the biomedical research enterprise. And I encourage you to look at those programs if you're at a place that has a BEST program to interact with the individuals involved in this initiative. There's some great resources and data that are being produced from these sites. And for those of you who are trainees, there's a website for the BEST program that is specifically for you in terms of thinking about career choices and making plans for your future. So that's just to put in a plug for the BEST program. I think just one last thing I want to say on this is that there's some pretty interesting data that I hope gets out soon is that there's this fear that if trainees take time off from research to explore career options, that it's going to affect their productivity and the like. And I think there's some nice data showing that this is not the case. And in fact, it does not negatively impact progress in the lab. And I think that will be powerful data to get out into the community to say that it's a positive thing to make sure that trainees know where they're going and that they have the skills that are needed to get there. In the area of diversity, there is now a new office, the Scientific Workforce Diversity Office, and there's a chief officer, Hannah Valentine, who's responsible for thinking about diversity initiatives across the NIH, and this includes the intramural program on site at NIH, as well as the extramural community. And they have a web page that is the sort of portal to this, and they're making inroads in both intramural diversity and thinking about the diversity in the extramural community as well. The Office of Extramural Research also has a portal for diversity efforts so that you can go in and depending on what kind of program you would like to have in place, or whether you're a trainee looking for funding opportunities, there's a nice portal that gets you to the various places across NIH that have diversity efforts. So this is helpful for those of you who are looking for funding sources to try to enhance diversity in the biomedical research workforce. And also another common fund program, again, so Trans NIH, it's being administered through NIGMS in our office at the Training Workforce Development and Diversity Office, and this is the Diversity Program Consortium. And it's comprised of 3 layers. One is the Building Infrastructure Leading to Diversity, or BUILD program. One you may or may not have heard of, the National Research Mentoring Network. And then finally, the Coordination and Evaluation Center. And what this program is, it's a little different in that from our previous NIGMS funded programs enhancing diversity, in that the evaluation piece is built in from the beginning, and one of the major goals is to try to collect data to say what kinds of practices work well in enhancing diversity. I think we all have a sense that research experiences, mentoring, cohort building, skills development are all important in terms of transitioning and sustaining the interest of trainees in biomedicine. But now we're gathering data on this so that you can have robust studies saying that these are effective practices in this space. So just a little bit about BUILD and how it's different from previous programs, apart from the fact of it's taking this scientific approach to training and mentoring interventions. There's also a simultaneous intervention at the student level, the faculty level, and then trying to bring about institutional change. And I mentioned the scientific approach. The National Research Mentoring Network, its goal is to promote and provide mentoring to diversify the biomedical research workforce. And the NRMN has several components. One is a matching and linking, so those of you, everybody in the room could come in either as a mentor or a mentee, and there are abilities to link up with people across the country. The idea was to really make sure that trainees who might not have access to mentors at various places could do that. There's also an opportunity to have a guided virtual mentoring relationship where you can have, this is a much more in-depth relationship. If you're interested in being a mentor or a mentee, you can have find an individual in the country that is suited to you and your career goals, and you can have a mentoring relationship that's separate from what you have at your home institutions. There's also a mentor training component, and you may or may not have heard of this. There are train the trainers, so you can send groups to be people to be trained, and then they come back to your institution to do mentor training. There's culturally aware mentoring services as well. And then is just basically part of their goal is to promote the value of career mentoring across the nation and to do any kind of networking and referrals. So the Diversity Program Consortium is in its 4th of 5 years of its first phase, and there will be another 5-year phase for the program. For NRMN, there's going to be a new component in the second phase that I actually would encourage all of you to think about. So for phase 2, one of the exciting things is that we're going to be having what are called UO1s, which is basically a research grant, but it's a cooperative agreement. So NIH is a partner in the scientific enterprise. And these research grants will go towards the science of mentoring and basically trying to get data, robust data, to show the value of mentoring in the biomedical training environment. And the areas that we're encouraging some thought in are the science of mentorship, the value of networking, and then also how to navigate critical career transition points. And I encourage you to look at the funding announcement I put on here, and if you're interested in doing research in this space, we encourage applications, and those are due in June. NIGMS also supports research in this space as well. It's called Research to Understand and Inform Interventions that Promote the Research Careers of Students in the Biomedical Sciences. And so these are R01 grants. And just to give you a sense of what types of grants these are, they're in the area of building self-efficacy and science identity. Both of these things have been linked with persistence in biomedical research, reducing stereotype threat, mitigating unconscious bias, diminishing imposter syndrome, the value of creating networks, mentoring, coaching, and sponsoring, forming cohorts and learning communities, emphasizing cultural assets, engaging family and support networks, and increasing cultural awareness. So these are some of the things, slightly non-traditional maybe, ways of ensuring that individuals persist in the biomedical research pathway, in particular women and underrepresented minorities who tend to leave the pathway at a higher rate than well-represented men. So we're going to be re-releasing this funding announcement soon, so look for that if there are those of you who are interested in that type of research. Also in the diversity enhancing space, NIGMS has a number of programs, actually now starting even at the high school level through the SEPA program, which has now come to be housed in NIGMS. And then we have a number of programs that span the biomedical pathway from undergraduate to graduate to postdoctoral space. These are, you see a number of the names up here I'm sure you've heard of before. And we intend to continue these programs. Some have started in the 70s and will persist through. One of the new areas we're thinking about putting more efforts is into the postdoctoral space. Right now, it looks sort of flat and it looks as though we have the pathway pretty well covered, but if you look at the number of slots, actually it diminishes drastically in the postdoctoral space. So what we really want to do is to think about innovative programs that can enhance the diversity of academic scientists. And we know things like the cohort model works well, that mentoring is a key component, skills development, and we're trying to think about programs and ways in which we can do this in the postdoc space to transition from the postdoc to faculty. And finally, we know that institutional accountability is also an important component of these programs. And right now, there's a lot of great support for individuals, but we would like to have something that has a kind of mentoring, overarching mentoring, and then institutional accountability. I mean, basically, if there is a problem with a mentor in something like a K award, there's really no way to ensure that that doesn't happen again, at least not effectively. So, but with a mentored program and with institutional accountability, you can really keep track of that. So I would love to hear your thoughts on that when we have time in the question and answers, what ideas you have, because we're still thinking about that space. All right, now I'd like to move on to an important topic, I'm sure, to all of you, which is trainee benefits. And this is coming primarily out of the Office of Extramural Research. There's now a National Research Service Award, NRSA, and that's basically all of the, a lot of the T32s and Fs that you've heard about come through the NRSA mechanism. And the goal of this, and I'm actually on the working group as well, and the goal is to come up with strategies to optimize the NRSA program, clarify leave policies, and the ability to request an extension for interruptions to permit completion of the training, So you could have potentially a sudden loss through accident, illness, or other personal situations, including the birth of a child or adoption of a child, that would allow you potentially to extend this NRSA. So if you got a fellowship and you had a life event, this would allow you to extend it beyond that. We're also very interested in enhancing the benefits for NRSA postdoctoral trainees or fellows, and this is an absolute top priority. And everything is pending budget and other implementation issues, but I think that you should know that Kay Lund, who is the head in the division of the Biomedical Research Workforce Office at OER, is really committed in this space, and I hope that will be good news to you, because we're thinking hard about this. Also, there's something that is in the works. It's things that are being discussed, and this is to pilot research support mechanism for NRSA recipients to promote independence. So right now, if you get an F-32, for example, in the postdoc space, it's a kind of delicate walk because you're supposed to be independent. But on the other hand, there's not really research funds that are tacked with that. So it's sometimes a little bit of a conflict with the principal investigator and the postdoctoral trainee. So really trying to think about ways in which you as F-32 recipients could potentially apply for some research funds to really get an independent line that would put you in a good position for an independent position. So, and again, we'd be interested in your thoughts in this space. All right, I'd like to move on a little bit to early stage investigators now, and I'm sure that many of you are thinking in this space as well. I want to encourage you to go to the Office of Extramural webpage, and there's a specific area for Research Career Development Awards. I've just cropped it at the K01 here, but it goes, as you know, up to K99. So there's a vast space for mechanisms in research career development, and I've just shown the first here, but you can find the one that best fits you and best fits your career stage. Another item I'm sure that you've heard about and are interested in, and this is the Next Generation Research Initiative. This is coming directly from Congress. You can find the wording specifically, and it's about supporting young emerging scientists is the subtitle C. And so the director of NIH shall, and here's the wording here, but basically develop, modify, or prioritize policies as needed to promote opportunities for new researchers and earlier research independence, such as policies to increase opportunities for new researchers to receive funding, enhance training and mentorship programs for researchers, and enhance workforce diversity. So this is built into the Cures Act, and NIH is working in this space right now to figure out things to implement. So just to give you updates on this, so it was presented at June 2017 to the NIH Advisory Committee. There was a guide notice that was published in this, and you're welcome to go read that particular notice. It's basically to enhance support for early stage investigators. It's being refined with feedback from NIH leadership and ongoing input from a working group at NIH. And also, there's input from an NIH-supported National Academies of Science and Engineering and Medicine study, and that's going to be actually released, I think, this week. So the public release is Thursday, April 12th at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time. So you can either see that in person or you can get the webcast later. All right, so what do we mean when we say early stage investigator? There is a actual NIH definition, and this is a person who has completed their terminal research degree or end of postgraduate clinical training, whichever is later, within the past 10 years. And you have not successfully competed for substantial NIH awards. There's a little disclaimer here for clinicians who should update their ERA comments to make sure that their early stage investigator does match with their postgraduate clinical training. So something you may not know is that actually you can request an extension of early stage investigator status, and for those of you, maybe you're not there now, but when you get there, really think about it. So principal investigators can, if you experience a lapse in the research training or circumstances that necessitated less than full-time activity, NIH will consider requests to extend the early stage investigator status. So there's a range of things that are include the justification for the extension. And they're made by a case-by-case basis at the discretion of NIH. And so if you're interested in doing this, or you know people who may fall into this, there's a notice is given here, and there's also an extension request form. And I really would encourage you to do that because there is a lot of important opportunities for early stage investigators. All right, so I want to close out with a few resources that are available for both current and next generation researchers. The first is one that I really would encourage those of you who are thinking about ultimately applying for NIH funding is to become an early stage reviewer. And this is a program that was developed basically to demystify the process and also educate early stage investigators in the ways of study sections. They have study sections online and various things, but it's something about being in the room and hearing the conversations that go on that can be extremely helpful to early investigators. So please go to this webpage. There's a form to fill out. There are a few suggestions. You need to have 2 years of experience as a full-time faculty member. Postdocs are not yet eligible, but once you have the faculty position, you are. You have some evidence of being an independent researcher as well, maybe publications and otherwise. But I would encourage you to get your name on the list as soon as you're eligible. Another interesting feature that I think some people may know about, but I actually have already found it to be tremendously helpful, and it's called the Matchmaker part of NIH Reporter. And what you can do, if you're really trying to figure out where you belong in the NIH system, which institute or center you should be sending your application to, you can put your abstract into this text box, and it will do an analysis and tell you how many grants NIH funds in this space, what institutes and centers they can find them in, and most importantly, it can put you in touch with a program officer. And so for me, I took one of my former students' abstract, popped it in, and so I should give him the advice to go to basically NIGMS would be the best source. They've given 3 different program officers to potentially contact. And then the final message for those of you who are thinking in this space is probably the most important thing you can do is to get in touch with your program officer and to form a strong relationship and to have conversations with this person. I think many people apply and they just send it out there, but there are human beings on the other side. Get to know them. They can help you. They know the ins and outs of the systems, and they can really help guide you through the process in a way that makes it more human and is extremely helpful. So probably the best advice I could give if you forget everything else is contact your program officer. And now there's a fantastic tool to identify the folks, the institute and the folks involved. And finally, I want to introduce you to something that is pretty new through the Office of Extramural Research, in particular the Division of Biomedical Research Workforce. And this is a dashboard on the NIH Funded Workforce. And this is just an example. You can go in at any point. Here's the webpage. And the first part of the dashboard is showing research project grant applicants and awardees with funding rates. And so you can see applicants in the dark blue, awardees in green, and then the funding rate. It was better in the last in the early 2000s, but you can see over time it's really sort of flattened out in terms of the success rate overall. I don't have a pointer, but up in the corner, you can see that this is for all of NIH, but if you know that you're in, let's say, NIDDK is yours, you can just show the data for that particular institute or center, so you can see the success rates for that institute versus another one if you're trying to decide where to send your application. And so another important feature is it gives you, they can tell you the success rates of the research project grants by age, by applicant experience, and you can see those trends over time. Also by gender and race and ethnicity. Once again, you can do this per institute or center. And then also you can change all of the settings, whether you're an MD, whether you're an MD PhD or a PhD. And this is just showing you a comparison across those groups of people, but you can change the settings if you're an MD. So, all right, so that's just some of the new features that are available at NIH. And now I'm happy to take questions or comments. I think we have plenty of time for that. I guess there's a microphone, and if not, I'll try to repeat the question for the group.
Hi, thank you so much for your insightful talk. There's so much information, so I'm looking forward to, we'll get the slides, I assume.
Sure.
Katie Flint from Stony Brook University. I had a quick question about something you said when you were talking about creating more mechanisms in the postdoc space in terms of diversity. You specifically used the phrase helping these postdocs transition to faculty positions, and I know that this is something we run across in most of the agencies, that most of the diversity programs that are directed at postdocs are really only looking at faculty outcomes as a success. And I know that this has inhibited some of the professional development that I've seen some of our diversity programs be able to do. I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit about the nature of that conversation at NIH and if there's been some broadening potentially of that outcome definition.
So it's an important question, and I think we need to just, face it head on, which is that while NIH on the one hand is taking a broader view of, and certainly I hope folks in the field are taking a broader view of what is the biomedical research workforce. So that includes a whole range of careers that are part of the enterprise, and that is absolutely true. I think that the troubling, and I probably should have shown the data, but there are data that say that although we've had a 9-fold increase in the number of underrepresented minorities earning a biomedical Ph.D. degree, so it's exponential, it's amazing. There has been success in this space. If you look at double AMC faculty hires, it's absolutely flatline. Nothing has changed. So while it's great and good news that there's been a 9-fold increase in PhD attainment, individuals going on to amazing careers in the biomedical research workforce, all kinds of exciting careers, we still have a serious problem in academic researchers of color. It's just a problem. And so I think that if we don't do something, we're pouring a lot of money into the undergrad space, a fair chunk in the pre-doctoral, graduate space, almost nothing in the postdoc space, and we have to do more. So yes, these careers are great and wonderful, and it's not a failure, but I think we still have to do something. We have to build some stability into the system. We're starting to learn through some of this research that I was describing why people are leaving, and why underrepresented minorities, underrepresented women in particular are leaving science altogether at a higher rate. What is it about the system, and how can we build some more stability into the system? And we know we already have data that cohort models work, mentored, a higher level of mentoring works, networking, skills. We know this, but we're not doing this in that space. We have the ERACTA program, which is fantastic. I don't know if you know about that, but that one is focused slightly more towards teaching. So it's academic teaching, and it's wonderfully successful. 70% of the trainees go on to some kind of academic position. About half are research intensive, and the other half are spread across the spectrum, community college up to 4-year colleges up to research intensive. So that's a wonderful program. It's a mentored cohort model, and we'd like to mirror that in some way, but in the research-oriented space. There's one back there.
Hi, I'm Marcela Hernandez from Ohio State, and I have a question. Have you had conversations about taking these principles that you're talking about the building a more diverse workforce, to the rest of NIH funding? Like, can we, for example, reward PIs who are good mentors with more grants? Because the problem that I see is that a lot of the people who get a lot of funding are not necessarily good mentors.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the people that you are asking why are they leaving the system are in these labs.
Right, so that's a great question. So it's really tough, and certainly as the Director of Training, Workforce Development, and Diversity, I don't have there's nothing I can do in the R01 world. What NIH has done is the individual development plan. I know that that's used in a mixed way by different people, but that's now a requirement for research grants. But what we're hoping to do is to put leverage on these training grants. So for example, we really are requiring that there's mentor training, that there's oversight, and we also want to see a plan for faculty that show poor mentorship qualities. What is their plan for removing such faculty from the training program? And so this is going to be associated with training dollars. So if a faculty member is dependent upon having graduate students who are paid through our T32 mechanisms, they're going to have to show have proficiency in mentorship, take it seriously, go through mentor training, and there is going to be a mechanism for bringing these people off of those training grants. So that's about the most that can be done, at least from where I sit, to try to put pressure. And the hope is that so this is now we're talking about the top institutions in the country in terms of research productivity. And so if we put pressure on those environments to do more about mentoring, to think about things such as culturally aware mentoring, that it will have a halo effect on the research environments. But it's a tough one to enforce. It's easier to kind of enforce in the training space when there are training programs. But if you have thoughts, I'm open. It's a tough one to crack. I'm with you, but it's a hard one to sort of really, how do I say it? Enforce it, basically.
Hi, Erin Heckler. I direct the Postdoc Affairs Office at WashU in St. Louis. Really excited about all of this. Like, that transition point is so important. And I have two questions. The workforce data, is there any data for FAKs that's similar to the RPG data?
Say it again?
The data that you're showing for the biomedical workforce, that's RPG data, does that include FNKs, or is there a place to find that data for FNKs for postdoc awards?
I'm sorry, what was the?
The F and K awards?
Oh, F and K awards, gotcha. Yeah. Okay, I'm not sure, I was just playing with it a little bit yesterday.
Sorry.
No, it's actually the acoustics are a little weird, so it's hard for me to hear things. So for the training, basically, what is the diversity of the training? I think that that's something that, I know that that's at least in the works, that you want to have full transparency, not just in the RPG research project grant world, but in all of the training mechanisms as well. So yeah, I know if it's not there, it's in the works.
Okay.
Yeah.
My other question is, how will the NIH determine that a faculty is no longer a good mentor? Like, what does that look like at the NIH level when you're thinking about removing people from training grants?
So we're sort of putting it back on the training folks, and so they have to have what's similar, when you have a multi-PI grant, you have to have a conflict resolution plan. We're requiring a plan for what they do in this space. So we're not sort of micromanaging the exact nature of it, and so it could look different at different places, but obviously a big part of it is oversight. So how are you monitoring that mentor-mentee relationship to ensure that things are going well on both sides? And then what do you do when it's clearly a case where there's a problem and, you know, potentially a repeat offender and other such. So what is their mechanism? And so we're not necessarily saying you must do this and this and this, leaving it up to the places. And I think just like other things like the plan to enhance diversity, there can be suggestions and guidance, but it's most important to come, I think, from the institution and for them to develop their own practices in this space. But we really want to see more, because we want to see that the faculty that are put on these training programs have a commitment to mentorship, have a commitment to training. They're also going to allow their trainees to have time to explore career options, and that they will help them in this space. So the hope is at least you build a cohort of faculty within that training program that are on board with all of these activities. And then again, it's a great thing to be on a training program faculty, because you get your students paid for at least a certain amount of time. And so I think that could be a strong incentive to sort of get on board with all of these activities.
Hi, my name is Maya. I work at the Society for Neuroscience, big fan of the Tomato program. My question is actually related to a grant opportunity that there's been some interest in, which is the F99s that have come through certain institutes. I was wondering if there's any plans to expand that program to other institutes or make it sort of institute-wide, because I think it's an interesting way to allow these underrepresented groups to transition from graduate school to postdoctoral positions without the fear of losing support based on, you know, what happens during their research.
Mm-hmm. That's right. So I think that, yeah, that's a really exciting mechanism that's just come out, and I think with anything else, as soon as I think people catch wind of it and see how well things are working, that could be potentially something that more institutes and centers will sign on for. I think that it's really key. Basically, transition points are crucial. I think that's where we lose a lot of people. And so I think thinking about how to stabilize transition points, and also just to build just some stability in the system, even out into the faculty space, more people might stay in the system if they felt it was somewhat more stable. So yeah, no, I think that's an exciting program, and we're all keeping our eyes out for the success of that. That's great.
Michelle Swanson, University of Michigan. You mentioned a funding announcement coming soon for a new R01 looking at research for training people in the biomedical field. Is that specifically for pre-docs, or will postdoc programs be included?
So this is for the research on interventions, the R01 coming out of NIGMS. Yeah, that's been a long-standing, we've been funding research in this space. We had a specific funding announcement for it, and then we just moved over to the standard R01 mechanism, and then the applications fell off. So we're bringing it back into the forefront as a solicitation in this space. It can cover the pathway. We at NIH are discouraged from supporting research in the high school space. They think that's more NSF's realm, so it tends to be from undergrad and then up.
But including postdoc?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Hi, Debbie Fedor from Florida State University. My question was, I was wondering how NIH could be more fluid across institutes, because the problem that I'm having is that, well, okay, so we resubmitted an F31 diversity application, and to an institute that was deafness and communication disorders, and we were told that the African American female student was not disadvantaged enough. She was a first generation in college, but their initiative was deafness, so she did not have a disability in that sense. So her application couldn't be reviewed. So then we did the F99 D-SPAN that Maya talked about, and we talked with the program officer, and they accepted her area of study, but then they found out that my funding was through NIDCD, and so then they would not review her application. So here's the targeted person that you want.
Sure.
You said women, underrepresented, African American, and you know she's butting her head against the door. And getting very discouraged. So if there's a way to make an umbrella program across so many institutes, they could still be reviewed in the different panels, but to have it linked so that there be some fluidity. And another example is I've got students who want multidisciplinary careers that you talked about at the beginning of your talk. An individual in my lab who wanted an MBA and a Ph.D. in biophysics. And NIDCD was great for that. And they helped me navigate that, and that was no problem. So I wondered if there could be more fluidity.
Yeah,
and if you could take that back to
Okay, so let me just tell you, I've only been here for 2.5 years, and one thing I have learned is that there are silos, you know, so, and each institute and center has their goal for their scientific workforce development. And what happens is, the reason why NIGMS, so we're the general medical sciences, the reason why we are half of training at NIH is that we're sort of, you know, flexible and open, and we say, you know, we're just training the next generation. We're not specifically looking to build neuroscientists or cancer biologists or aging researchers. And so what happens with the institutes, their training dollars compared to NIGMS, where it's nearly a quarter of our, I'm going to get that wrong, but a big chunk of our budget in comparison to other institutes. So they have to be very careful about how they spend their training dollars. And so I hear you, it's frustrating. There should be a kind of, when it comes to this sort of thing, a broader, and that's why NIGMS is the majority of diversity programs come through NIGMS as well. So, I think that's why we also need to do more work in the later pathway, because what the thought was, you know, we train early and then they go off into different disciplines, but I think we really have to think about continuing to fund across the pathway. And somebody's got to do it, because I think what happens is exactly what you said. They have a very narrow focus in terms of workforce development, and their budgets are limited for them. So yeah, it's a tough one. I think that except for common fund initiatives, but those are short-lived, and those are across, you know, trans NIH, but those are maximum 10 years, usually only 5 years. It's really hard to get kind of uniformity across the institutes, but I think it's kind of on NIGMS on some level, because we are committed in this space. So I hear you.
Hi, Amy Stone from the University of Washington Postdoc Association. I have 2 questions that are related, and it all comes back to this idea of, as trainees, we are facing this completely new world and what you were talking about of keeping up, but who dictates what training we get, what career paths are open to us, are not the people that are going through that path. So what I was wondering was, on your working group, who is the postdoc representation voice?
Sorry?
Who is the postdoc representation voice on your working group about these initiatives?
So are you talking about the National Research Service Award Committee?
Yeah, the working groups that you have, that you're thinking about these different training mechanisms and what should be involved in them.
So so the ones that I know, so there's intramural, so inside NIH stuff going on, but when there's outside, so for example, there's this whole structure, the advisory council to the director, they have these working groups. And the ones I know about the most that I'm involved with are diversity-focused working groups. And on that, we have postdoctoral, and we're really interested in having early career. You know, it would be great to even have graduate student, but we certainly have postdoc representation and early stage career folks in the diversity space. But that's the ones that I'm most familiar with. I don't think there is a working group on diversity, on just the biomedical research workforce right this second. There was one a few years back, and I don't remember, maybe other folks, I wasn't at NIH at the time, you know, who the postdoc representations were. But I think that is an issue. I mean, I think that's a key issue. If you're not talking to the trainees, then we just had a conversation about this before. If the number of other committees in my other life that I was on that were about trainees where there were no trainees on the committee, it was like, what are we doing here? So I hear you. I think it's a really important voice. And I think the one of the balances is just like anything, is that committees are a huge time commitment and other such things, and so you have to balance the person's career and other important things that are going on in their lives as well, and you don't want to overburden them at a really vulnerable stage of their career, but I think it's really important to hear those voices. So one of the things that we did when we were working for the funding announcement for trying to catalyze change in graduate education was to we have a request for information, and we specifically sent it out to every person, every trainee that we funded through our mechanisms, through Fs and Ts and otherwise, to encourage them to either write to us or to submit anonymously to the webpage to try to get the student voices. And I have to say, I mean, for me, it was, the testimonials were heartbreaking. Some of the things you would hear were words like slave, or they won't let me, these kinds of really, and what it does is it puts, I got pushed back and they say, well, it's not a quantitative study, and it's like, I don't care. If just even one person writing that. Sorry?
There's value in qualitative research.
Oh, yeah, and I think it puts voice to it in a way that just gives you chills, right? That people are feeling like indentured servants, or to use the word slave. I mean, I think that is, when I use words like, oh, there's a conflict in the research incentive structure. Like, that's a nice way of putting it, but really, there are people who are suffering, and when you hear their voice. So I agree with you. It's a balance of hearing a voice, trying to get representation. Writing any kind of paper or white papers that you can write, I think, is really important too. And I think you should know that people listen to that. It's not, they don't discount that voice. It's just how do you do that without overburdening. It's just like if you're an underrepresented minority, you get put on every committee, So there is sensitivity to the voice, but trying to find the best way to get that. So keep your eye out for requests for information. You can get on, I think, you can get a feed that tells you when they're up, and you can write in on all of those initiatives to keep your voice in the game.
Awesome. My other question was to do with the training grants and removing PIs who are bad. I was wondering, is there a responsible conduct in research training requirement for the mentors, and could that be something that we could work into those training mechanisms?
Yeah, that's a great point. So responsible conduct of research, what we have tried to do in this funding announcement as well, it used to be just a little checkbox at the end, and you had to follow a certain curriculum, and it was mostly for students, but now we want it to be part of the entire training experience, and we also want to see, again, that faculty are being chosen who uphold responsible conduct of research, uphold the issues around rigor and transparency, and they have to say how they incorporate that into the research laboratory setting as well, because we know where a lot of the training happens in the research laboratory. And so if you're off taking classes and you hear all this stuff, but then if you move into the research space and those principles aren't being reinforced, then you have a significant problem. So that hope is that there is cohesion across the curriculum, and then when a trainee transitions into the lab, that this is getting reinforced, and the more practical components of it, because you hear the abstract when you're in courses and training activities, but then in the lab, that's where you really see rigor and transparency, responsible conduct, safe laboratory practices. So that's the goal.
Hi, Julia Moncaster from Boston University, and I'm on the NPA Board of Directors. Thank you for being here today. Great information. I'm wondering if you could just expand and clarify a little for the community, the international postdoc community in particular, on the reasonings or the rules and regulations behind the eligibility of international postdocs on F32s and T32s. I know the K99 is a great system that is open to international postdocs, but why not those training grants?
Yeah, so it is frustrating. I think that the National Research Service Awards it's congressionally mandated, and it's very clear that it needs to be U.S. citizens or permanent residents that can move, once transitioning into more independent spaces, as R01s and the K awards are open to. It's unless we can get congressional change to the language, this is where we are. There's some things we can change, there's some stuff we can't change without Congress behind us. So.
Hi, thank you for all this information, this great presentation. I have a question and maybe a comment about mentor accountability. One of the things that I think may be associated with that, with mentor quality, or at least a number of studies are starting to show is associated with postdoc and graduate student satisfaction with mentor quality, is the frequency of meetings that PIs have with their mentees. And one thing that NIH can do is control the number of grants that PIs can have at a given point in time, which influences the number of mentees they can have at a given point in time, which influences the amount of time they can spend on each mentee.
Yeah.
And I wondered if there has been any thought towards
moving
in that direction.
All right, so a couple, once again, I have my little itty bitty sphere of influence, and this is one of the things that we have put again into these T32 training grants, which is to say, in the past it was really about, do you have the right faculty expertise, and are there sufficient numbers of faculty with that expertise? One of the things we put into this is basically bandwidth. So it's one thing to be a famous scientist, it's another to have the bandwidth to do the training that you need to do. So we're saying, okay, it's great that you're a recognized scientist, but it used to be if you were an XYZ with these honorifics, that was a positive thing, or it tended to be something that could have been focused on in terms of just what was written in the funding announcement, but we specifically ask about bandwidth now. So that's in the training space. But then NIGMS in particular has, I think, been a leader in this, where John Lorsch, the institute director, is really has limited there's a cap to the research dollars that can come from NIGMS in particular. So if anybody gets over $750,000 a year, there has to be a memo written why that person, should be allowed to have more. And he has encouraged these MIRA awards where you can consolidate 2 grants into one, and the idea being, and it's good for science, it's good for mentoring. Basically, you don't know where the great next discovery is going to come from, so you shouldn't concentrate all of the money into a few labs. You should really disperse it across the country because you don't know where innovation is going to come from. So that's his philosophy. He's moving NIGMS in that direction. There was a movement at NIH. For those of you who were paying attention for about 2 seconds, the Grant Support Index, where they were going to start tracking this in terms of the number of grants, and each grant had a sort of, and it was some point system, and that was rolled back. So now it's part of a working group where they're exploring these issues. So it's definitely on the radar. It made some forward progress, and now we're stopping to think about it. And but I think there is, apart from the mentoring piece, which I think is a fantastic point you're making, it's also true that there's diminishing returns, and they've shown this, they have the data for this, that per grant dollar you get diminishing returns as you increase the number of grants. And we get it, right? If you have a lot of money and a lot of productivity, you don't need to chase down that one thing that didn't work out so well, because you've got plenty of other things going, but that could be somebody's career. So I think there are a lot of issues in the training space. So I think at NIGMS, we're 100% with you, completely agree, and there are conversations and there are working groups focused on this at NIH, so it's a great point.
Hi, thank you for the great resources. My name is Megumi. The question that I had was that I think it's great that a lot of these awards focus really on the mentor making a plan for mentoring their trainees. But the other extreme that I've seen, and I don't know if it's like a rare case or if other people have seen this, but is that sometimes the mentor then kind of does a sloppy job on the the mentor, like the training portion, and the student who's working really hard in trying to get this grant ends up kind of getting, thrown in a ditch. So then for a person who's trying really hard to excel in the academia and trying to promote his or her career through these grants, I was wondering if there are ways for people in such unfortunate cases to be independent, trying to acquire funding for themselves, even though they're kind of being not taken care of by their mentors.
Right, okay. Yeah, so in the undergraduate space, we really don't have individual fellowships. These are all mentored training programs, and they tend to be focused much more at enhancing diversity. In the predoctoral space, there are the F31s and F30s if you're MD, Ph.D. And so there's some individual fellowships of the F awards. And then there's also F awards in the postdoc space, F32s. And that does not have to be, the career awards have very specific sort of, and they vary across the different institutes. But F32s are across the institutes and centers, and you're able to apply for those. You can't apply for them completely independently of your advisor. There needs to be a mentoring plan, because these are still considered training, because they fall under the National Research Service Award, and so you do have to have training plans, and you do need to coordinate with your advisor. In particular, working out the research plan and the research area and making sure there's not 100% overlap of the two. And the idea being to protect the trainee so that you can carve out an independent research line that you can then take with you. That's at least the goal from the NIH perspective. And that was what I was just sort of alluded to, is that we're at least thinking in this space and would like to hear your thoughts about having research funding, actual research dollars, not just to pay the trainee, that would be associated with some of our independent awards, so that you could really carve out an independent line. So that the argument being, well, there aren't research funds to pay for it, so they have to overlap with my research, and this could be a way for trainees to gain independence. It's probably good to have folks across the spectrum in here, but it's what we have heard, at least, is that not all postdocs have PI status, principal investigator status, and so it could be hard for them to apply for such things, but it's something we're thinking about in that space. Did that answer your question? Is that what you're talking about for finding independent? Okay, all right, thank you.
Hi, I'm Jay from the University of Michigan Postdoc Association, and I have a couple comments. In regards to the mentorship and oversight of NIH on mentors, on training grants, I think it would behoove NIH to really look hard at having the trainee directly respond through ERA comments on all training grants in terms of mentorship. It seems to me that a lot of the responses and monitoring of grant progress goes back through the mentor or back through the grantee, and that really kind of exacerbates the power dynamic between the trainee and the mentor. And so it would be difficult for us to directly respond and say, yeah, my mentor's not doing a great job. I feel like I'm not being treated well. I mean, it's disturbing to hear things like slave and overworked and can't and not being led, but that's our reality.
Yeah,
like,
I know,
there's not a single postdoc that doesn't feel that at some time.
Yeah, sure.
So the other thing is, in my experience being on training grants, they're all programmatic training grants, where there's a program director who has it and they distribute it, but it's my mentor who's the person who's mentoring me. It's not that program director. So it seems to me there's another rung of oversight that's missing in that capacity is that they're not really actively looking at my mentor. They're looking at my progress through the program director. So looking at the programmatic training grants might be another avenue to explore. I don't know if that discussion's already happened, for alternative mentors that come along the way. And then the third point is that a lot of the progress that I've seen NIH make in terms of individual development for trainees has been very much like a positive career development in terms of IDPs, networking, all that sort of thing, but it doesn't seem like there's a lot of investment on protection for trainees, right? If I have a bad relationship with my mentor, my career's over. If I have one faculty member that really doesn't like me as a graduate student, I may not progress. I may not get a good postdoc. So it seems to me that an investment in protection for all trainees could really help facilitate the problems in diversity, the problems in equity and inclusion, as well as just equity between mentors and trainees. And it's important that, and I don't know if this is acknowledged enough, but it's important that the NIH understands just how much power they have over investigators and mentors. Like the leverage that can be gained just by saying, if you do not do this thing properly on your grant, you will have your grant removed, really scares people that have the grants.
Sure.
And I think that's not acknowledged enough in terms of protecting trainees.
Yeah, so I think that, I hope you're gonna, I'm old, I don't remember 3 points. So if I miss some of those 3 points, then you come back, grab the mic again. So I think that, yes, I hear you, and I think that this is a huge problem. Again, the research, the R01 it's a tougher nut to crack. That is a tough one. And so that's why we're coming at it through the training grants. And that's why I would prefer to fund training grants rather than individual Fs in the early phases, because I think it's a really vulnerable spot in trainees' careers. And this is where we have the potential to have the most leverage, I think, in terms of the kind of oversight that you're talking about. So included in, so there has to be, as we mentioned, oversight of the mentor-mentee. They have to have, the plan and what do they do and how do they monitor this. So how do they monitor the mentor-mentee relationship? And this is for the, program, the T32 program. They have to have a mechanism for that. We're encouraging them to get feedback from trainees on a regular basis, and that should feed back into programmatic improvements. So a lot of places don't even survey trainees at all. So this is trying to move them into the space of getting feedback from the very people that you're given money to train and support. I think it's an interesting idea that you have, and it's something that we've certainly been thinking about. It would be breaking new ground in terms of surveying trainees through some, whether we do it through ERA comments or some mechanism to have oversight. And we would have to think hard about, some programs there's 4 trainees, and so you have to be super careful because, you don't want it to come back to the particular, as you say, you can get really punished. And so we have to think, so it's easy if it's a 40-person program, but if it's a 4-person program, then we have to worry about protecting the rights of the individuals in terms of feedback, in terms of consequences of having a score that is not optimal. So what we're trying to do is to push it back onto the training programs and say, you've got to think about these things. You've got to think about monitoring not just how good people feel, which is important, is huge, but did you give them the skills that you were supposed to give them? Do they know where they're heading? Is there oversight of this relationships to make sure that their career is not destroyed if there's a bad, if it's an unfortunate pairing of 2 people, which can really wreck a career. So having them be the oversight is the best that we can do at this point. I think it's a start, it's a step in the right direction. I think we're going to just have to see how these things start to play out and what kind of role we can play. I think that when they have to now include it in the application, then study sections can think about it, but also there's places in progress reports for program officers to say you're really, not up to speed in the way that we would like to see in terms of getting feedback from individuals and making sure there are safeguards for people's careers. So I hear you. I think it's challenging, but it doesn't mean it's not worth trying. So I think we've got to try everything we can. And we're piloting it with this pre-doctoral program. I think there's been some interest across NIH, and we'll see if we're successful, then maybe at least some of the language will get adopted potentially into the parent announcement, which I would hope it'd have a broader effect. So did I hit your point? I hope I hit all your points. Okay, all right.
Hi, Jessica Babb from Boston Children's Hospital. I'm a postdoc there. Thank you so much for coming today and for fielding all of our questions and for presenting. My question is similar and kind of along this same line. I know that for F31 and F32 grants, it's supposed to be required for the PI to have an individual development plan and a yearly IDP meeting with their postdocs. And I wonder, have there been discussions at NIH to enforce that more at either at the level of the institution, requiring some proof, hard proof, not just asking the trainee in the progress report, where the trainee might be pressured to say, yes, I did have an IDP meeting, even if it's not true. Have there been discussions of enforcement of that IDP meeting or some kind of yearly review process?
So, do you have any ideas? I mean, I'm open to suggestions and thoughts. It's a tough one, right? Because if all you get is, so on some level, people are in fact committing fraud if they turn in a progress report that's not true, right? That's a problem. But we have to take people, we can't just assume everything is fake, right? We have to kind of take people as they're at their word. So do you have any thoughts? So that's why I do prefer a mentored training program where there is oversight and double checks and the person signing off really is responsible for that. Do you have any thoughts in this space? Because I'm wide open, because it's hard to say, well, I don't trust you.
Yeah, at Boston Children's Hospital, every department kind of runs as its own separate entity, and so there are departments that are really good and have a process in place, but it's fragmented, so some departments don't have any process in place, and those trainees can kind of just slip through, and 70% of the postdocs at Children's report that they haven't had a review in the last year, in the last 12 months. And so we're trying to push for our kind of an across the board for all trainees, postdocs included, to have some kind of formal review process. So NIH, if you could pressure institutions to, just like you do for RCR, for the responsible conduct of research, prove that there's some kind of formal process in place at the level of the institution for all trainees, not just
for IDPs and the like. Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting point. Certainly there's something, the equivalent of that in the space of the business official. So if things start getting a little shady with the business side of the grant, that you get like a black mark. I don't know I'm not as much in that space, but I do know there are ways to follow up on that. So I could certainly bring that back as a, that would be kind of for the parent announcement and for an institution to allow submission of these types of awards. They would have to have a mechanism in place for maybe IDP verification and other. Yeah, I mean, I can bring that back in terms of seeing where that could be embedded in and exactly how that, so then it's on the institution, and then the institution is the enforcer. So yeah, I'll certainly bring that back in terms of, because I think it's tough to do at the individual program officer level, because then it's just kind of, but yeah, if we could do a broader, and for the RO ones as well. Right now it's in an interesting space. They're required to do it, but it's true that the institutional oversight is variable. That's great, thank you.
Hi, I'm Bill Mahoney from the University of Washington. These are all great programs, and I thank you for providing them. Can you talk a little bit about how you're training the reviewers of these grants? These are new rules for T32s, but everyone who is on a study section is usually a current T32 director or faculty member. And they had other rules and regulations when they got there. So how is that transition going to occur? And is there going to be some gray area for a while that people write them to the old? I know we're all supposed to read the new rules, but if we're not responsive to what's there, how's your office going to address that?
Yeah, so fortunately, I mean, I can't speak for all of the initiatives, but at least at NIGMS, it's coming through our scientific review office. And there is a plan in place for how we're going to do at least the retooling for this particular T32. And one of the things that we're going to make sure that there's expertise in those areas that may be perceived as sort of being new. And one is, how do you evaluate training and mentoring programs effectively to ensure that you're meeting your training objectives? And so folks that have been in that space, we're looking for reviewers there. Areas of diversity and inclusion as well. I think that's easier. We have our diversity-focused programs in the undergraduate space, so it's a little easier to, that those are some actually experienced reviewers in that space as well. When, in terms of career preparedness, people who have been working in this space already, in the BEST program and other such areas, so people who think about that. We're looking to get institutional leaders too, because how do you implement this at an institutional level? And then we're also interested in getting folks who are the recipients of our trainees, so people in different fields, maybe in industry and otherwise, to make sure that the training is broad enough for the range of careers that trainees are transitioning to. So this is just a start, and then there's also going to be a couple of orientations for the new panel to make sure that they're focusing on the funding announcement and not, previous. And I think I should say, I just want to say in defense of review for a minute, is that I think that people are pretty well intentioned and they do the best that they can. But the past funding announcement, the parent was so broad because it was supposed to cover pre-docs and up to clinical postdocs, this T32 parent announcement. And so because it was so broad, there was no specificity to it, and you couldn't ask really specific questions. So one of the things that we've done, and we've been kind of criticized for it, but on the other hand, it's helpful, is the review criteria are quite detailed. And now the reviewers are going to be obligated to follow that funding announcement, and they're going to really need to go through point by point. Whereas before, things were kind of open to a bit of interpretation, which could potentially head in one direction. For example, just in terms of trainee outcomes, because it was a little bit vague, you could veer towards publications, whether they got a postdoc, whether they got a faculty position, whether they got F32s and the like. And so, because those are things you can count. It's harder to quantify that somebody went on to policy, somebody went on to this and that. They may not have publications or other things that are easy to quantify. So now, if it's built in the review criteria, it really helps. It will help us guide the reviewers more specifically. We'll say, well, no, you got to think about this, and you got to think about this. So I think that it should give them a tool, I think, that will help the conversations, and it will cause a uniformity across review sessions where they're all answering the same sets of questions. But the plan is to try to bring in at least some expertise in areas that maybe we're venturing into, some new space. And you can do that by bringing in ad hocs and then bringing them on permanently. So, and I think that people have been doing their best, but they've been doing their best with a somewhat blunt instrument, which was the parent T32. So it's on our minds. We're thinking about it.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Momany from the University of Alabama at Birmingham. And I just had a quick question going back to the K Awards. I know that you've got the K01, I think, which is the Diversity Award. Is there any talk of maybe developing a K99 R00? Because on the K01, there's no movement to independence on that award. So is there any talk of maybe...
For diversity?
Yeah, for diversity.
Yeah, so that's the one I was telling you about that we're thinking about at NIGMS. It wouldn't be a K99 R00 because we really are concerned about this oversight question that keeps coming up. And so we would like it to be K99 R00 like, except it's a cohort model. There's a mentoring, there's oversight. So the idea is it would bridge the transition, but there's added value because if, you know, it was mentioned, if you have, you know, a poor mentor-mentee relationship, that can derail a person's career. But if there's oversight and accountability, you know, that's what we're sort of looking for, particularly, you know, just an added layer of, you know, and if you have this cohort that is kind of clustered around, let's say, a certain scientific discipline, you can bring together the group before a national meeting and do skills development and other such things, and then they attend the meeting, and once they've gained the networking skills, and they go out, and then you have other activities throughout the year to build the cohort and professional development. And it's just a way to build the community, build the cohort, and allow for a successful, safe transition, including research support on the other side, and accountability. I mean, one of the things about the R00 is that the institutions have to report the startup packages. And if you see discrepancies for underrepresented minorities or women versus well-represented men, then you can start saying, what's going on here? You know, the program officer can step in, or the person doing the oversight can step in. So there's lots of ways in which I think it's really nice to have an added layer. But the concept is the same, is to bridge safety in that transition.
So it's in the works. Also, my neighbor had to leave, but he asked me to ask a question.
Okay.
He wanted to know if there's any discussion on moving for postdocs from stipend to salary. Is there any discussion with that?
Oh, yeah, that's been an issue. Ooh, that's a complicated one. Yes, there has been discussion. I think that's it's for, you know, there's a lot of pluses and minuses in the categories, and that is a conversation that is happening right now. I think it would solve some problems and it would create others, and so we have to be really careful about those. And so I think it's still in the works of trying to. It's impossible to really understand all the implications of doing things, but that's why things move slowly in the government. But yes, it is a topic of conversation.
All right, so we have to end here. Thank you very much for this great discussion.
Okay.
Before we end, I'll just turn over to Julie for the last few minutes.
We didn't get to honor our meeting committee chairs, and Leo had to leave, but I do want to recognize Carrie Kaufman. Carrie, would you come on down here? Let's give Carrie a round of applause. For those who don't know Carrie works for AACR, and she has to go from here and then run the AACR conference in Chicago next week. So we really appreciate her dedication, and we wanted to thank her for all her hard work and service. Thank you, Carrie. And we'll get one to Leo for his service as well. So thank you for Leo Chang for his work as well. Tracy, are you coming up here? Is there a break? And then Tracy, are you coming up here for the town hall? Is a break first? Okay, so we have a break first, and then we'll be having our town hall coming up. So enjoy.